The last promise of Lord Ashcombe. The rain had begun before dawn, a fine, persistent rain that did not fall with the violence of a summer storm, but seemed instead to descend from the low grey sky in 1,000 patient threads, settling upon the hedges, the bare branches of the elms, and the long brown fields until the whole countryside appeared softened and distant, as though it had been remembered rather than seen. By the time Eleanor Vale reached the lane that led toward Ashcombe Manor, the hem of her travelling dress was dark with mud, her boots were wet through, and the little boy asleep against her shoulder had grown so heavy that she could feel every pound of his weight in the arm that supported him. She stopped beneath the dripping branches of an old ash tree and looked ahead. The lane disappeared between two weathered stone walls, their tops green with moss and fern, and beyond them stood the house. Ashcombe Manor was larger than she had imagined from the few descriptions she had heard, though it was not the sort of grandeur that announced itself. There were no bright windows, no carriage lamps burning beneath a covered entrance, no servants crossing the gravel with purposeful steps. The house seemed to have withdrawn from the world. Its long grey facade rose behind a wilderness of bare roses and overgrown shrubs, while the upper windows, narrow and tall beneath their stone lintels, reflected nothing but the pale afternoon sky. For a moment, Eleanor wondered whether she had mistaken the place. Then she remembered the letter. She reached into the pocket of her cloak and touched it with her fingertips, though she had already read it so many times that she knew every line by heart. Lord Ashcombe had died 3 months before. The house was closed. There was no family residing there, and yet the final sentence of the letter had been unmistakable. She was to go to Ashcombe Manor. She was to remain there until she was safe. No explanation had accompanied those words, and Eleanor had been given no opportunity to ask for one. The solicitor who had sent the letter had been unable to tell her more, or perhaps unwilling to do so. He had merely said that the late Lord Ashcombe had left certain instructions which were to be obeyed precisely, and that Eleanor Vale was named in those instructions. Named. The word had followed her through the last 3 weeks like a quiet question. She did not know Lord Ashcombe. At least, she did not think she did. She had seen him only twice in her life, and on neither occasion had they spoken more than a few words. He had been an old man then, grave and pale, with the tired eyes of someone who had spent too many years carrying a private burden. She had been newly married, scarcely 20 years of age, and far too preoccupied with the embarrassment of being introduced into a house filled with people who seemed to know exactly where they belonged. She could not imagine why such a man should have remembered her. She could imagine even less why he should have made provision for her after his death. Thomas stirred against her shoulder. "Mama?" His voice was small and thick with sleep. "I am here. Are we there?" Eleanor looked once more toward the manor. "Yes," she said softly, "I think we are." She did not tell him that she had no idea what awaited them beyond the iron gates. The boy lifted his head and looked at the house through the rain. His fair hair had fallen across his forehead, and there was a little red mark upon one cheek where it had rested against the wool of his mother's cloak. "Is it ours?" The question was innocent, but it touched something in Eleanor that she had spent months trying not to touch. She lowered her eyes. "I don't know, darling." That was the truth. She had once believed that a house was something permanent, something which remained when people changed and fortunes altered and promises failed. She had learned otherwise during the winter after Arthur's death. The house in which she had been married had ceased to be hers almost before the mourning period was finished. Her husband's family had spoken of propriety, expense, inheritance, and the inconvenience of a young widow with a child. They had never used the words abandonment or cruelty. Such words were considered too plain for respectable people. Instead, Eleanor had been told that she would be more comfortable elsewhere. Elsewhere had meant a small rented room in a village where the walls were thin, the roof leaked, and the woman who owned the house had begun to ask questions about the overdue rent before the first month was over. Then the money had disappeared. Then the letters had stopped. Then there had been nothing left but the small travelling case at her feet, Thomas's hand in hers, and the name of a dead lord written upon a piece of cream-coloured paper. She picked up the case now. The iron gate stood open. That was the first thing that troubled her. She had expected it to be locked. The second thing was the gravel. There were no weeds growing through it, though the gardens beyond the drive were plainly neglected. The stones had been recently disturbed, as though a carriage had passed that way not long before. Eleanor stood very still. Rain touched the brim of her bonnet and ran coldly along the side of her face. "Perhaps someone is here," she whispered. Thomas looked toward the house. "Will they let us in?" "I expect so." But she did not sound certain. She took his hand, lifted the little case, and began walking. The drive curved gently through the grounds. On either side stood trees that had lost most of their leaves, their dark branches reaching across the sky like fine black lines upon a sheet of silver. The lawns had not been cut for some time, and the rose garden beyond the eastern wall had gone almost completely wild. Yet here and there, Eleanor noticed signs that the neglect was not quite as complete as it first appeared. The dead leaves had been swept from the steps. The brass knocker on the front door had been polished. And beside the entrance, beneath a small stone canopy, there was a lantern. It was lit. Eleanor stopped. The flame moved gently behind the glass. Someone had been here. Thomas pressed closer to her. "Mama?" "I see it." The front door was not locked. She placed her hand upon the iron handle and hesitated. There are moments, Eleanor would later think, when a person's life divides itself without ceremony. There is no thunder, no sudden revelation, no voice from heaven to announce that what comes next will alter everything. There is simply a hand upon a door and the knowledge that, once it is opened, the world on the other side will no longer be quite the same. She opened it. Warmth touched her face. Not much, but enough to make her understand immediately that the house had not been abandoned. The entrance hall was dim, with high oak paneling darkened by age and a long carpet whose original colors had almost disappeared beneath years of use. Portraits watched from the walls, their faces solemn in the weak afternoon light. Somewhere deeper within the house, a clock was ticking. Eleanor listened. The sound was remarkably clear. Tick, tick, tick. She had expected silence. Instead, Ashcombe Manor seemed to be breathing. Thomas stepped inside. His wet little boot left a dark mark upon the carpet. "Oh," Eleanor murmured, almost apologetically. Before she could remove his coat, a door opened at the far end of the hall. An elderly woman appeared. She wore a black dress, a white collar, and a small silver brooch at her throat. Her hair was completely grey and drawn into a neat knot beneath a lace cap. She stood with one hand upon the doorframe and looked at Eleanor for a long moment without speaking. Eleanor felt suddenly aware of everything about herself that was unsuitable for such a house. Her damp cloak, her muddy boots, the worn travelling case, the child beside her, and the exhaustion she had failed to conceal. The woman's gaze moved to Thomas, then back to Eleanor. "You are Mrs. Vale." It was not a question. Yes. The woman closed her eyes briefly, as though confirming something to herself. "My name is Agnes Bell. I was housekeeper to Lord Ashcombe." Eleanor swallowed. "Was?" The older woman's expression softened. "I still am." There was something in the answer that Eleanor did not understand. Mrs. Bell stepped aside. "You had better come in before the rain finds its way into the house." Eleanor hesitated. "I am sorry to intrude." "You were expected." The words were spoken so simply that Eleanor almost missed their meaning. She looked at the housekeeper. "Expected?" Mrs. Bell glanced toward the staircase. Lord Ashcombe gave certain instructions before he died. Eleanor's fingers tightened around the handle of her case. What instructions? But Mrs. Bell did not answer immediately. Instead, she looked once more at Thomas, whose eyes had begun to close again. "The nursery fire has been lit since noon," she said. Eleanor stared at her. "The nursery?" "Yes, but there is no child here." "No." The old woman's voice became quieter. "There has not been a child in Ashcombe Manor for 19 years. For a moment, the rain outside seemed louder. Eleanor felt a strange chill move through her, although the entrance hall was warm. "Then why?" "Because Lord Ashcombe ordered that it be kept ready." Mrs. Bell turned toward the corridor. He would never explain why. She began walking. After a moment, Eleanor followed. The house seemed larger inside than it had appeared from the drive. Corridors extended beyond corridors, each opening into another dim room, another silent stretch of polished wood and faded wallpaper. Yet there was no sense of decay. Dust lay upon the carved tables, but not heavily. Curtains had been drawn back. Fires had been prepared. Lamps were filled with oil. Someone had been maintaining the house. Not for visitors, for waiting. As Eleanor climbed the staircase with Thomas in her arms, she noticed a portrait hanging above the landing. It showed Lord Edmund Ashcombe. She stopped. She had not seen him for many years, yet she recognized him immediately. The portrait showed a man in his late 50s, dressed in black, standing beside a stone fireplace. His face was stern, but not unkind. One hand rested upon the back of a chair, while the other held a folded letter. Eleanor looked at the painted hand. For reasons she could not explain, she remembered a different hand, older, trembling slightly, holding a cup of tea. She remembered being 20 years old and standing beside her husband at a winter gathering, while Lord Ashcombe had looked at her from across the room with an expression she had mistaken for disapproval. Now, looking at the portrait, she wondered whether she had been wrong. Perhaps he had not been judging her. Perhaps he had been trying to remember her. "Mama." Thomas's sleepy voice brought her back. She turned away from the portrait. "Yes. Is this our room?" Mrs. Bell had stopped at the end of the corridor. "It is." She opened the door. The room beyond was small but warm, with a narrow bed, a writing desk, a washstand, and a window overlooking the western garden. A fire burned steadily in the grate. Upon the bed lay a folded white nightshirt. Beside it was a small wooden horse. Thomas saw it at once. He slipped from his mother's arms and crossed the room. Eleanor remained in the doorway. The little horse was old-fashioned, carved from dark wood, its paint worn away along the mane. Thomas picked it up carefully. "For me?" Mrs. Bell said nothing. Eleanor looked at her. The housekeeper's face had become strangely grave. "I believe so. But how could Lord Ashcombe have known about my son?" Mrs. Bell looked toward the fire. "That," she said, "is something Mr. Reed will explain to you tomorrow." "Mr. Reed?" "Lord Ashcombe's solicitor." Eleanor felt the old uneasiness return. She looked around the room. There was something almost unbearable about its gentleness. Someone had thought about the height of the bed. Someone had placed the child's nightshirt there. Someone had remembered a wooden toy. The kindness of it frightened her more than the locked gates would have done. She had become accustomed to people wanting something from her: money, silence, obedience, gratitude. She was not accustomed to receiving something for which no price had yet been named. That evening, after Thomas had eaten a little soup and fallen asleep beside the fire, Eleanor stood alone at the window. The rain had stopped. Beyond the glass, the grounds lay under a pale mist, and the bare trees appeared almost blue beneath the moon. Somewhere, beyond the garden wall, water moved slowly through the stream, making a sound so faint that it might have been imagined. Eleanor pressed her fingertips against the cold window pane. For the first time in months, she was not afraid of what would happen before morning. That frightened her too. On the dressing table behind her lay the letter from Mr. Nathaniel Reed. She had unfolded it once more before going to bed. There was only one sentence that mattered. She read it again. Lord Ashcombe instructed me that if Mrs. Eleanor Vale should ever come to Ashcombe Manor with her child, she was to remain beneath his protection until she was safe. Eleanor lowered the letter. The room was very quiet. Outside, the mist moved slowly across the garden, and somewhere in the old house, beneath the steady ticking of the clock, something gave a soft mechanical click, as though a lock, untouched for many years, had just opened, waiting for her long before she knew that she was coming. She folded Mr. Reed's letter carefully and placed it beneath the small porcelain paperweight upon the desk. Then she looked at her sleeping son. Thomas had curled himself beneath the blankets, one small hand resting upon the wooden horse that Mrs. Bell had placed beside him. His face, softened by sleep, seemed younger than 5. In the dim firelight, Eleanor could see the faint shadow beneath his eyes, the mark left by too many nights spent in unfamiliar rooms. She stood watching him for a while. Whatever Ashcombe Manor concealed, whatever Lord Ashcombe had intended, whatever strange chain of circumstances had brought her to this house, she would endure it. She had endured worse. And if there was one thing motherhood had taught her, it was that fear became strangely manageable when another person's safety depended upon your courage. By morning the rain had passed. A pale winter sun appeared behind a layer of thin cloud, illuminating the wet branches of the trees and turning every drop of water upon the hedges into a small bead of silver. Eleanor woke before Thomas and lay quietly for several minutes, listening to the unfamiliar silence. There was no traffic outside, no voices in the corridor, no clatter of servants preparing breakfast, only birds. A rook called somewhere beyond the western garden, answered after a moment by another from the distant woods. It was a peaceful sound, almost too peaceful. When Eleanor went downstairs, she found the breakfast room already prepared. Mrs. Bell was standing beside the window. "You slept?" "Yes." "Good." The older woman poured tea. Eleanor sat, though she noticed that there was another place laid at the table. "For Mr. Reed?" Mrs. Bell nodded. "He is expected at 9. "And Lord Ashcombe's heir?" A small pause. "Mr. Julian Ashcombe is expected as well." Eleanor lowered her eyes to the tea. She had heard the name before. Everyone in the county had. Julian Ashcombe was Lord Edmund's nephew, the son of his younger brother, and, according to the newspapers, the natural heir to the Ashcombe estate. He had spent most of his adult life away from the county, serving with the diplomatic service before returning to England following his uncle's illness. There had been rumours after Lord Edmund's death. Some said the old lord had altered his will shortly before he died. Others said he had quarrelled with Julian. A few, with the confidence peculiar to people who had never met either man, insisted that Julian would sell Ashcombe Manor as soon as the estate was settled. Eleanor had paid little attention to such gossip. Until now. "What is he like?" she asked. Mrs. Bell looked out through the window. "He is his uncle's nephew." It was not an answer. Eleanor almost smiled. That sounds rather ominous. For the first time, the housekeeper's mouth softened at the corners. "Mr. Julian is not a cruel man. But he does not like surprises." Eleanor thought of the letter in her pocket. "Then he will not like me." "No," said Mrs. Bell quietly. "He will not." Before Eleanor could reply, the sound of wheels came from the drive. Both women turned toward the window. A dark carriage passed through the open gates. It came slowly along the wet gravel, the horses steaming faintly in the cold morning air. The carriage stopped before the house, and a man stepped down. He was tall, dressed in a dark travelling coat, with no ornament except a silver watch chain visible against his waistcoat. His hair was nearly black, though the pale winter light caught a few lighter strands at his temples. He paused before the door. For a moment, he looked up at the house. There was something in his expression that Eleanor could not read. It was not affection, nor hatred. It was recognition mixed with reluctance. The front door opened. Mrs. Bell did not move. "Mr. Ashcombe," she said. Eleanor understood. Julian entered without haste. He removed his gloves as he crossed the hall, giving his coat to no servant, because there was no servant there to receive it. His gaze moved across the room and stopped when he saw Eleanor. Neither spoke. He had expected a stranger. She could see that. But he had not expected a woman with a child. His eyes moved briefly to Thomas, who was standing beside his mother and holding the wooden horse. Then back to Eleanor. "Mrs. Vale, yes." His expression changed almost imperceptibly. "I am Julian Ashcombe. I know." Something about the answer seemed to surprise him. "Then you know why I am here." "I assume you have come to discuss the estate." His eyes rested upon her for another moment. "Yes." There was no warmth in his voice, but there was also no hostility. That somehow made Eleanor more uneasy. He looked toward Mrs. Bell. "Is Mr. Reed here?" "Not yet." Julian glanced at the clock. "He is late. He is never late." Julian's expression tightened. "Then today is an unusual day." He turned back to Eleanor. "You received a letter?" "Yes." "From Mr. Reed?" "Yes." "And you were instructed to remain here?" "Yes." He seemed to be waiting for something. Eleanor did not offer it. At last he said, "Do you know why?" "No." The answer came more quickly than she intended. Julian studied her face. "Did my uncle know you?" Eleanor hesitated. "I met him twice." "Twice?" "Yes." "Were you acquainted?" "No." He seemed dissatisfied. "You never corresponded?" "No." "Did you ever ask him for assistance?" "No." "Did my uncle ever offer you money?" "No." Julian's jaw tightened. "And yet he left instructions concerning you?" "Yes." Silence settled over the breakfast room. Outside, a blackbird landed upon the wet stone wall and shook the rain from its feathers. Eleanor looked at Julian. "I believe you have questions. I have many. So do I." That stopped him. For the first time, something like interest entered his expression. "Then perhaps," he said, "we should wait for Mr. Reed." They did not have to wait long. The solicitor arrived 20 minutes later. Mr. Nathaniel Reed was a narrow-faced man in his late 50s, with silver hair, round spectacles, and the habit of holding his gloves in both hands whenever he was thinking. He greeted Julian with the formal politeness of a man who had known him since childhood, and then turned to Eleanor. "Mrs. Vale, Mr. Reed, I apologize for the delay." "You are not late," Mrs. Bell said. Mr. Reed looked at her. "Then I am exactly on time." She did not smile. Eleanor suspected that the two had known one another for too many years to require ordinary courtesies. Mr. Reed removed his spectacles and cleaned them slowly. "I believe there is no purpose in delaying the matter." Julian stepped toward the fireplace. "No." Mr. Reed looked at Eleanor. "Lord Ashcombe left a final testament. I was told that." His final testament contains several unusual provisions. Julian gave a short, humorless laugh. "My uncle had a particular talent for unusual provisions." Mr. Reed ignored the remark. "One concerns you." Eleanor felt the room become strangely still. "What provision?" Mr. Reed reached into his leather case. Instead of producing the will, he removed a smaller envelope. It was old. The paper had yellowed slightly at the edges, and the seal had been broken. Eleanor looked at it. "Is that for me?" "Yes." "From Lord Ashcombe?" "Yes." She did not reach for it. Something held her back. Perhaps it was fear. Perhaps it was the knowledge that whatever was written inside had been waiting for her long before she knew its existence. Julian watched her. "You may open it." She looked at him. "You seem very certain." "My uncle's handwriting does not frighten me." Eleanor lowered her eyes. "I am not frightened of his handwriting." She took the envelope. The seal had already been broken, but the letter inside remained folded exactly as it had been written. Her hands trembled once. Only once. She unfolded it. The handwriting was old-fashioned, precise, and slightly uneven. There were only a few paragraphs. She read them silently. Then she read the first sentence again. "Mrs. Eleanor Vale, if you are reading this, it means that the world has failed you in precisely the manner I feared it would." Her breath caught. Julian looked away. Mr. Reed lowered his eyes. Eleanor continued, "I cannot prevent what has already been done to you, and I cannot ask forgiveness for a wrong I did not commit. I can, however, leave instructions for what must happen afterward." She stopped. The room seemed suddenly smaller. She read on. "You are to remain at Ashcombe until the matter concerning your husband is settled. You are not to surrender the house, the child, or any document placed into your keeping. Above all, you are not to believe the first account given to you of Arthur Vale's death." Eleanor's hand went cold. She read the sentence again, and again. Arthur Vale, her husband's name. For a moment she could not hear anything else. The room blurred slightly. She lowered the letter. "What does this mean?" No one answered. Julian had gone very still beside the fireplace. Mr. Reed's face had lost its professional calm. Eleanor looked from one man to the other. "What does this mean?" Mr. Reed spoke carefully. "Your husband's death was recorded as an accident. I know. Lord Ashcombe did not believe it was an accident." Eleanor stared at him. "He told you that. He told me that he had reason to doubt the official account." "Why?" "I do not know." She stood. The chair moved softly against the floor. "You expect me to believe that my husband did not die as I was told, and yet you cannot tell me why Lord Ashcombe believed it." Mr. Reed removed his spectacles. "I can tell you what he instructed me to do." "I did not ask what he instructed you to do." "I understand." "Then tell me the truth." Her voice did not rise. That made it more powerful. Julian watched her closely. Mr. Reed sighed. "Lord Ashcombe believed that certain papers connected to your husband's death were concealed somewhere in this house." Eleanor felt the room tilt beneath her. "Why would they be here?" "Because Lord Ashcombe believed that Arthur Vale brought them here." She stared at the old solicitor. "My husband had never been here." Julian spoke quietly. "He had." Eleanor turned toward him. Julian's eyes were fixed upon the floor. "My uncle told me that much." "When?" 6 months before his death. Why did he never tell me?" Julian looked at her. "I don't know." Eleanor felt anger begin to rise beneath her fear, but she held it down. For months, people had spoken around her. Her husband's family had spoken around her. The solicitor who arranged her departure had spoken around her. Even the clergyman who had conducted Arthur's funeral had spoken in careful phrases, as though the truth were a delicate object that might break if handled directly. And now, in this old house, she was discovering that the dead man she had mourned might have carried secrets she had never been allowed to know. "What papers?" Mr. Reed shook his head. "Lord Ashcombe did not say." "Then what am I supposed to do?" "Find them." The answer was so simple that it was almost cruel. Eleanor laughed once, quietly. "I have never searched a manor for hidden documents." "Neither have I," Julian said. She looked at him. His expression had softened, only slightly, but she noticed. Mr. Reed closed his case. "There is one further matter." Eleanor waited. "Lord Ashcombe left you permission to remain here indefinitely." Julian looked sharply at him. "Indefinitely?" "Yes." "And under whose authority?" Mr. Reed met his gaze. Lord Ashcombe's. He is dead. His will is not. Julian's face hardened. This is my family home. And his final legal instruction. The silence that followed was not hostile. It was heavier than that. It was the silence of two men discovering that the dead could still interfere with the living. Eleanor looked toward the window. Beyond the glass, the garden was beginning to brighten beneath the thinning clouds. The wet branches of the apple trees shone softly in the pale light, and a few dead leaves moved across the gravel. The house suddenly seemed less like shelter. It seemed like evidence. She turned toward Mrs. Bell. "Did Lord Ashcombe know about my husband?" The old housekeeper stood beside the door. "Yes." "How much?" Mrs. Bell looked at the portrait above the fireplace. "More than he ever told you." Eleanor's heart sank. "And you?" "I know what I was instructed to know." "That is not an answer." "No," Mrs. Bell said quietly. "It is the only answer I can safely give." Julian looked at the housekeeper. "Agnes." She turned. "What did my uncle make you promise?" Mrs. Bell's expression changed. For the first time, Eleanor saw something like grief in the old woman's face. "He made me promise that if Mrs. Vale ever came here, I would open the house to her." Julian frowned. "And that I would not let anyone send her away." He stared at her. "Anyone?" Mrs. Bell looked directly at him. "Anyone." Julian said nothing. The room fell quiet again. Then, from somewhere upstairs, came the unmistakable sound of a child's laughter. "Thomas." Eleanor turned immediately. She hurried toward the staircase. "Thomas?" There was no answer. She climbed 2 steps at a time. Julian followed. Mr. Reed remained below. At the top of the stairs, Eleanor found Thomas standing in the corridor. He was looking at the door at the far end. A door she had not noticed before. It was painted white, though the paint had yellowed with age. Thomas held the wooden horse in one hand. "Mama," he whispered. "What is it?" He pointed. "The man." Eleanor's heart stopped. "What man?" Thomas looked toward the closed door. "The man who was here." Julian had reached them. His face changed. "What man, Thomas?" The boy looked up at him. "The sad man." Eleanor knelt. "Did he speak to you?" Thomas shook his head. "He told me to wait." The corridor seemed to grow colder. "Where?" Thomas pointed toward the white door. "There." Julian moved forward. Eleanor caught his arm. "Wait." He looked down at her hand. She released him immediately. Neither spoke. Julian placed his hand upon the door handle. It did not move. Locked. He looked at Eleanor. "Do you have a key?" "No." Mrs. Bell had followed them upstairs. She stopped several paces away. Her face had gone pale. Julian turned. "Agnes." The housekeeper looked at the door, then at Thomas. Then she closed her eyes. "That room," she said softly, "has been locked since Lord Ashcombe died." Eleanor looked at her son. "What room is it?" Mrs. Bell opened her eyes. "The West Nursery." Thomas tightened his grip upon the wooden horse. But he was there. No one corrected him. Because at that moment, from the other side of the locked door, came a single sound. Not a voice, not a footstep, a quiet knock. Once, then twice, then silence. Julian's hand remained upon the handle. Eleanor stood beside her son, and beneath them, somewhere deep within Ashcombe Manor, the old clock began to strike 10. The sound travelled slowly through the house, one solemn note after another, while beyond the windows, the winter morning continued to brighten, entirely unaware that 3 living people had just heard something that the dead had apparently been waiting 19 years to say. E-painted door. Thomas stood close against his mother's skirt. Eleanor rested one hand upon his shoulder. "Did you hear it?" Mrs. Bell nodded. I heard it. Julian looked at the door. There is no one in there. His voice was controlled, but Eleanor noticed that he did not sound convinced. He tried the handle again. The lock remained firm. Where is the key? Mrs. Bell hesitated. Lord Ashcombe kept it. He is dead. Yes. Then who has it now? The old housekeeper looked at him. I do not know. Julian's patience broke slightly. Agnes. She raised her chin. I have worked in this house for 37 years, Mr. Julian. I have watched 3 generations of your family quarrel over money, marriages, horses, politics, and matters which were none of their business. I have survived all of them. If I tell you I do not know where a key is, then I do not know. Julian stared at her. Eleanor almost smiled despite herself. There was something comforting in the old woman's refusal to be intimidated. Mr. Reed had now joined them. He looked at the door with an expression of concern. I believe we should not force it. Julian turned. Why not? Because Lord Ashcombe specifically instructed me that this room was not to be opened until Mrs. Vale had arrived. Eleanor looked at him. You knew? I knew there was a room. You knew it was locked? Yes. You knew I was supposed to open it? No. The distinction seemed absurd. Eleanor felt the beginning of anger again. Then what exactly did you know? Mr. Reed sighed. Only what I was instructed to know. She gave him a tired look. Everyone in this house appears to know something except me. Mrs. Bell lowered her eyes. Julian said nothing. Then Thomas tugged at Eleanor's hand. Mama! She looked down. What is it? He pointed toward the bottom of the door. There, where the wood met the carpet, something pale had been pushed beneath the narrow gap. A letter. Eleanor knelt. She hesitated before touching it. The envelope was old and slightly stained, but her name was written across the front. Not Mrs. Vale. Not Eleanor Vale. Simply, Eleanor. Her breath caught. Julian crouched beside her. Do you know the handwriting? She looked at the envelope. No. Mr. Reed did. He stepped forward. That is Lord Ashcombe's hand. Eleanor slowly turned the envelope over. There was no seal. She opened it. Inside was a single sheet of paper. The handwriting was unmistakably the same as the letter she had read downstairs. There were only 3 lines. You have been told that your husband died by misfortune. You have been told that Ashcombe has nothing to do with you. Both statements are false. Eleanor stopped breathing for a moment. Julian read over her shoulder. His expression changed. Give it to me. She did not. He looked at her. This concerns my family. It concerns my husband. The words were quiet, but they ended the argument. Julian stepped back. Eleanor read the final line. When you are ready to know why, look beneath the 3rd stone in the west garden. She lowered the letter. The corridor was silent. Then Mr. Reed said, We should not go there alone. Eleanor looked at him. Why? Because your husband may not have been the only person who knew about the documents. A chill passed through her. Julian looked toward the window. The western garden was visible from the end of the corridor, grey and neglected beneath the pale morning. We go now, he said. Mrs. Bell frowned. The ground will be wet. I do not care. I do. Julian looked at her. She folded her hands. You may be accustomed to rushing about your uncle's estate, as though the place belongs to you, but I have spent 37 years keeping people from destroying things in this house. You will not tear up the garden because you have suddenly discovered a letter. Eleanor almost laughed. Julian did not. But something in his face suggested that he was trying not to. We will wait until after luncheon, he said. Mrs. Bell nodded. Good. Then she looked at Eleanor. And you will eat first. The authority in her voice was so absolute that Eleanor found herself agreeing before she had even thought about it. It was nearly noon when they finally went outside. The weather had changed again. A faint mist had settled over the lower grounds, and the sunlight appeared and disappeared behind clouds, moving slowly across the winter sky. The western garden lay beyond a low stone wall, half hidden behind yew trees and climbing ivy. It had once been beautiful. Eleanor could see that immediately. Even in neglect, the shape of the garden remained. Old paths curved between flower beds. A stone bench stood beneath a leafless pear tree. There was a small fountain at the center, though no water moved through it now. The garden had not been abandoned so much as forgotten. Julian walked ahead. Eleanor followed with Thomas. Mr. Reed remained behind them, carrying his leather case. Mrs. Bell did not come. She had said she would wait in the house. Eleanor suspected she knew more than she wished to admit. They reached the third stone. It was part of the old garden wall, darker than the others and partly covered with moss. Julian knelt. "There are several loose stones. The third from the gate," Eleanor said. He counted. 1, 2, 3. He placed his fingers beneath the edge. The stone moved. Behind it was a narrow hollow. Inside lay a small metal box. Eleanor felt her heart begin to beat faster. Julian lifted it out. It was not locked. There were papers inside. A small notebook, 3 folded letters, and a miniature portrait. Eleanor reached for the portrait. The face of the woman painted there was unfamiliar. She was young, perhaps 25, with dark hair and serious grey eyes. On the back was written, "Margaret, 1871. Julian looked at it. "My mother." Eleanor turned toward him. "Your mother?" He nodded. "Lady Margaret Ashcombe." She looked again at the portrait. She was beautiful. Julian's expression softened. Yes, it was the first time Eleanor had seen tenderness in him. For several seconds, he simply looked at the miniature. Then he said, "She died when I was 11. I am sorry." He nodded. "My uncle raised me after that." Eleanor looked at him. "So you were close." Julian smiled faintly. "I thought we were." The words carried more sadness than anger. Mr. Reed opened the notebook. This belonged to Lord Ashcombe. The first pages contained estate accounts, then dates, names, payments. Eleanor looked over his shoulder. One name appeared repeatedly. Arthur Vale. She froze. "My husband." Mr. Reed nodded. The entries were brief. Payments made. Meetings. Letters received. Travel expenses. Nothing was immediately incriminating. But one date made Eleanor's blood run cold. It was 6 months before Arthur's death. Beside his name was written, "Met with Edmund. He knows." Nothing more. What did he know? Mr. Reed turned the page. The next entry was written 3 days later. Arthur insists that she must never be told. Eleanor felt the world narrow around her. She? Julian looked at her. Who is she? Mr. Reed continued reading. There was another entry. If anything happens to Arthur, protect Eleanor and the child. Eleanor closed her eyes. For a moment she could not speak. Thomas was playing quietly beside the garden wall, entirely unaware of the meaning of the words adults were reading. Eleanor turned away. She looked across the garden. The mist had begun to lift. Beyond the wall, bare branches stretched toward the sky, and somewhere among them a robin was singing with astonishing persistence. She pressed her hand against her mouth. The grief she had carried since Arthur's death had always been tangled with anger. She had mourned him. She had also hated him. She had hated him for leaving her with debts she had not known existed, for secrets he had never explained, for the family that had turned cold the moment he was buried. Now, for the first time, another possibility appeared. Perhaps he had been afraid. Perhaps he had been trying to protect her. Or perhaps he had betrayed her in a way she had never discovered. She did not know which possibility hurt more. Julian approached quietly. "You should not read more. I have spent a year being told not to ask questions." He stopped. "I know." "No, you don't." He looked at her. Eleanor turned toward him. "You have a name, a family, a house, people who answer when you ask questions. You have never had to stand outside a door, wondering whether you were allowed to enter." Something passed through his expression. "You are right." She had expected an argument. His agreement disarmed her. "I have never known what that was like." The wind moved through the bare branches. Eleanor looked away. Julian continued quietly. "But I know what it is to be kept outside a room where the truth is being discussed." She looked at him again. "What do you mean? My uncle never told me why he distrusted my father." Eleanor waited. "My father died when I was 18. Edmund and he had not spoken for almost 4 years. Why? I was never told." Julian looked toward the manor. "I thought my uncle had forgiven him before he died. And now?" "Now I think perhaps he never did." Mr. Reed closed the notebook. "There is something else." He held up the final letter. It was addressed to Lord Ashcombe. The handwriting was unfamiliar. Eleanor watched him unfold it. He read the first paragraph, then stopped. "What is it?" Mr. Reed looked at Julian. "It concerns the estate." "That tells me nothing." "It concerns your inheritance." Julian took the letter. His eyes moved rapidly across the page. His face changed. "What?" Eleanor asked. He did not answer. Mr. Reed spoke instead. "Lord Ashcombe's original will was not the document we were given after his death." Silence. Julian lowered the letter. "What do you mean? There was another will." "Where is it?" "We don't know." "Then why are you telling me now?" "Because I believe this notebook tells us where to find it." Eleanor looked at the garden. The wind had risen. The branches of the old pear tree moved against the grey sky. "Where?" Mr. Reed pointed toward the manor. "The west nursery." Julian's expression hardened. "The locked room?" "Yes." Eleanor thought of Thomas's words. The sad man. The man who told him to wait. She looked toward her son. He was sitting on the stone bench, holding the wooden horse in his lap. Suddenly he looked up. Not toward her. Toward the house. His expression became solemn. Eleanor followed his gaze. A curtain moved in one of the upper windows. The west nursery. Julian saw it too. He stepped forward. "Who is there?" No answer. The curtain moved once more, then fell still. Mr. Reed closed his case. "We should return inside." Eleanor nodded. They began walking back, but before she crossed the garden gate, she looked down. Something was lying among the wet leaves. A small brass key. She bent to pick it up. It was old and darkened with age. A tiny letter had been engraved upon its head. E. Eleanor stared at it. Julian came closer. "What does it open?" "I don't know." Mr. Reed looked at the key. His face became very pale. "You do know," Eleanor said. He hesitated. Then he whispered, "It was Lord Ashcombe's private key." "To what?" Mr. Reed looked toward the upper floor of the manor. "To the room where he kept everything he trusted no one else to see." Eleanor closed her fingers around the key. For the first time since arriving at Ashcombe Manor, she understood that the house had not simply offered her shelter. It had given her a choice. She could remain the frightened widow who had arrived in the rain, grateful for 4 walls and a warm fire. Or she could open the doors Lord Ashcombe had spent years keeping locked. She looked at Thomas. The little boy smiled when he saw her. And Eleanor knew that whatever waited behind those doors, she would have to face it. Not because she was brave, but because she had spent too long allowing other people to decide which truths she was permitted to know. a peculiar brevity in that part of the country. The sun did not seem to set so much as withdraw, leaving the fields and woods to the early darkness, while the last pale colour remained caught between the branches of the trees. Beyond the western windows, the garden had become a study in grey and brown, the stone paths damp beneath a thin veil of mist, the bare roses bending beneath the weight of rain. Eleanor kept the little brass key in her hand. She had not put it into her pocket. There was something about its weight that unsettled her. It was a small thing, hardly more than the length of her thumb, yet it seemed to possess an importance entirely out of proportion to its size. The letter E had been engraved upon its head, and whenever her fingers closed around it, she felt again the strange certainty that Lord Ashcombe had intended her to find it. Not Julian, not Mr. Reed, her. Eleanor. The thought should have frightened her. Instead, it made her sad. She had spent most of her life believing that important things happened around her without ever happening because of her. She had been a daughter, then a wife, then a widow, and now a mother, and in each of those roles there had always been someone else who appeared to possess the authority to explain the world. Her father had explained what was proper. Her husband had explained what was necessary. His family had explained what was expected. Even after Arthur's death, when she had thought at last that she was free to make her own decisions, she had discovered that freedom was a poor comfort when one had no money with which to exercise it. Now, a dead man had placed a key in her path. And for the first time, someone appeared to be asking her to decide what came next. Mrs. Bell met them in the entrance hall. Her eyes went immediately to the key. She did not ask where Eleanor had found it. She did not need to. "Oh," she said. It was the quietest sound, but it carried more meaning than any question. Eleanor closed her fingers around the brass. "You know what this is?" Mrs. Bell looked toward the staircase. "Yes." "Then tell me." The housekeeper was silent. Julian removed his gloves. "Agnes." Mrs. Bell sighed. "I had hoped you would not find it so soon. So you knew it was there." "I knew it had been placed there." "By whom?" "Lord Ashcombe." Julian's face tightened. "You said you did not know where the key was." "I did not." "You knew it was in the garden." "I knew Lord Ashcombe had left instructions concerning it." "And you allowed Mrs. Vale to find it?" Mrs. Bell looked at Eleanor. "No." Her voice was very calm. "I did not allow anything." She turned toward the staircase. The house did. No one spoke. It was a strange answer. Yet, in Ashcombe Manor, Eleanor was beginning to understand that strange answers often contained more truth than ordinary ones. Thomas appeared at the top of the stairs. "Mama." Eleanor looked up. He was holding the wooden horse. "You must be hungry." He nodded. Mrs. Bell immediately turned toward him. "Come along, Master Thomas. I have something warm waiting in the kitchen." Thomas glanced at the adults. "Are you going to the room?" Eleanor's heart tightened. "Not yet." The boy looked relieved. He disappeared with Mrs. Bell. Julian waited until they were alone. "We should open it." Eleanor looked at him. "You sound almost disappointed." "I am not. You look as though you are." He gave a faint smile. "I am discovering that my uncle had a remarkable talent for making his intentions known only after he was dead." Eleanor almost smiled in return. Almost. Mr. Reed cleared his throat. "There is one matter we must settle before we open that door." "What?" "If the room contains the original will, then everything we find there may have legal consequences." Eleanor looked at him. "Then we shall be careful." "That may not be enough." "Why?" Mr. Reed lowered his voice. "Because if Lord Ashcombe's final will differs substantially from the one already admitted for probate, then the present inheritance may be challenged." Julian stared at him. "You mean my inheritance?" "I mean the estate." Julian's jaw tightened. And Mrs. Vale? Mr. Reed looked at Eleanor. That depends upon what your uncle left. Eleanor said nothing. She did not care about the estate. Not yet. She cared about the sentence in Lord Ashcombe's letter. Do not believe the first account given to you of Arthur Vale's death. That was enough. They climbed the staircase together. The manor seemed darker now. The portraits upon the walls had disappeared into shadow, and the lamps cast pools of amber light across the corridors. Somewhere downstairs, a fire crackled. The scent of beeswax, old wood, and burning coal hung in the air. Eleanor noticed how different the house felt at night. During the day, it had appeared merely old. Now it seemed watchful. At the end of the corridor stood the white door, the West Nursery. Thomas's words returned to her. The sad man. She did not know whether she believed him, but she had stopped dismissing him. Julian stood before the door. Eleanor held out the key. He did not take it. You should open it. She looked at him. Why? Because it was given to you. She hesitated, then inserted the key. For one moment it would not turn. Then, with a faint metallic click, the lock released. Eleanor drew a slow breath. She pushed the door open. The room beyond was cold, not merely unheated. Cold in the way rooms become cold when they have been closed for many years, holding the same air until it seems to have forgotten how to move. The nursery was larger than Eleanor expected. There were 2 tall windows, covered by faded curtains. A small fireplace stood against the far wall, its grate empty. A child's bed occupied one corner, covered with a white sheet. There were shelves, a rocking horse, a low wooden table, a cabinet filled with books, and on the wall, above the fireplace, hung a portrait. Eleanor stepped inside. Julian stopped beside her. The portrait showed a young woman, Lady Margaret. The same woman whose miniature they had found beneath the garden wall. But this was a larger painting. She stood beside the nursery window, one hand resting upon the back of a child's chair. She was smiling, not at the painter, at someone beyond the canvas. Eleanor looked at the empty chair. Was this her nursery? Julian shook his head. No. He moved closer to the portrait. My mother never had a child. Eleanor looked at him. Then why is she standing here? I don't know. Mr. Reed entered behind them. His eyes moved across the room, then stopped. Good God. Eleanor turned. What? He pointed toward the fireplace. There. Above the mantel was a small brass plate. Upon it were engraved 2 dates, 1871, 1878. Julian stared. My mother died in 1878. Yes. But what happened in 1871? No one answered. Eleanor walked toward the cabinet. The books were children's books, mostly nursery stories and simple primers. Several had been carefully repaired. One had a faded ribbon around its cover. She touched it. Dust rose into the light. There was something deeply sad about the room. It had not been abandoned in anger. It had been preserved, as though someone had been afraid that moving anything would erase a memory. Eleanor crossed to the little bed. She lifted the sheet. The mattress beneath was clean. Too clean. She touched it. There was no dust. Someone had been here recently. She looked at Julian. He saw it too. Agnes, he said quietly. But Mrs. Bell had not followed them. Eleanor looked beneath the pillow. Nothing. Then she noticed the wooden horse. Not the one Thomas carried. Another. This one was older. Its front leg had been repaired with a small brass pin. Eleanor picked it up. There was a name carved beneath its belly. Samuel. Her fingers went cold. Who was Samuel? Julian frowned. I don't know. Mr. Reed looked toward the shelves. Perhaps Lord Ashcombe did. He began searching the cabinet. Eleanor moved toward the desk. There was a drawer, locked. She took out the brass key. It fit. The drawer opened. Inside lay a packet of letters tied with faded blue ribbon. Eleanor stared at them. The top envelope bore a name, Arthur Vale. She sat down. Her knees no longer seemed willing to support her. Julian stood behind her. "Are you certain you want to read them?" "No." She touched the envelope. "But I must." The first letter was dated 11 months before Arthur's death. It was from Lord Edmund. The handwriting was firm. "Arthur, you have mistaken silence for protection. You believe that by keeping Eleanor ignorant, you are shielding her from danger, but ignorance is not safety. It merely makes a person helpless when danger finally arrives." Eleanor stopped. Her vision blurred. She continued, "I have warned you that the men involved will not stop with you. If you insist upon continuing, then at least understand that the consequences will reach your wife and child." Julian read over her shoulder. His face had become grave. The next paragraph contained a name Eleanor did not recognize. Mr. Horace Bellamy. Mr. Reed inhaled sharply. "You know him?" Eleanor looked up. "Yes." The solicitor's expression changed. "Who is he?" "My husband's uncle." Silence. Eleanor's fingers trembled. She had heard that name throughout the months after Arthur's death. Horace Bellamy had been one of the first men to visit her after the funeral. He had spoken with great concern about her future. He had urged her to accept a modest settlement. He had advised her not to pursue certain questions about Arthur's finances. At the time, Eleanor had thought him kind. Now she could remember the way he had avoided her eyes whenever she mentioned her husband's last weeks. She read on. "If I am right, Bellamy has already begun to remove the papers. There is one document he cannot know about. I have placed it where no one would think to look." The next line had been crossed out. Then another. The final sentence remained. "If I fail, you must tell Eleanor that I tried to keep my promise." Eleanor lowered the letter. Her heart was beating painfully. What promise? Mr. Reed looked at the writing. There is no explanation. There must be. She searched the packet. Another letter. Then another. Most were between Arthur and Edmund. Some concerned money. Some concerned shipping accounts. One referred to a property near the coast. Another mentioned a missing ledger. But the final letter was different. It was written by Lady Margaret. The date was 7 years before her death. "Edmund, you are wrong to think that keeping the child hidden will protect him forever. There will come a time when he must know his name." Eleanor read the line twice. Julian stepped closer. What child? The next sentence had been damaged by water. Only fragments remained. Samuel. Bellamy. Eleanor. Eleanor looked up. "Why is my name in this letter?" Julian had no answer. Mr. Reed approached. "May I?" She handed it to him. He read silently. His expression became increasingly troubled. Then he looked at Julian. "I think we should leave this room." "No," Eleanor said. He looked at her. She stood. "No more doors." Julian watched her. "No more rooms where everyone else knows something except me." Her voice remained quiet, but beneath it was something stronger than anger. It was exhaustion. "I have been told for a year that Arthur was unfortunate, that his debts were unfortunate, that his death was unfortunate, and that my circumstances were unfortunate. Everyone has had a word for what happened to me, but no one has given me the truth." She looked toward the portrait of Lady Margaret. "I will not leave." Julian's expression softened. "You don't have to." She looked at him. He seemed about to say something more. Then footsteps sounded in the corridor. All 4 of them turned. The steps were slow, measured. They stopped outside the nursery. Someone was standing beyond the door. Julian moved toward it. The handle turned. The door opened. Mrs. Bell stood there. Her face was pale. "Mr. Reed," she said. "Yes? You have a visitor." "Who?" She looked toward Eleanor, then toward Julian. "A gentleman." "Who?" Mrs. Bell swallowed. "Mr. Horace Bellamy." Eleanor felt every muscle in her body tighten. The room seemed to lose its warmth. Julian looked at her. "You know him?" "Yes." "Do you trust him?" Eleanor thought of the settlement he had offered her. The gentle voice, the sympathetic expression, the way he had told her that some questions were better left unanswered. She looked at the letters scattered across the desk, then at the portrait, then at her son's wooden horse lying beside the bed. "No," she said. The answer came without hesitation. "No, I do not." From downstairs came the sound of the front door opening. A man's voice traveled faintly through the hall, pleasant, cultured, almost familiar. Eleanor closed her hand around Lord Ashcombe's key, and somewhere inside her, the last fragile piece of the woman who had once trusted other people to tell her what was true, finally disappeared. She was still afraid, but she was no longer helpless. For a little while, no one moved. The sound of Horace Bellamy's voice rose faintly from the entrance hall, softened by the distance and the heavy doors between the rooms, yet unmistakable in its calmness. He was speaking to someone below, perhaps asking after the journey, perhaps offering some courteous remark about the weather. There was nothing threatening in his manner. That, more than anything else, disturbed Eleanor. She remembered that voice. She remembered how easily it had once made her feel that someone older and wiser had taken charge of matters she did not understand. After Arthur's funeral, when grief had left her unable to think beyond the next morning, Mr. Bellamy had spoken to her with the solemn kindness of a man who had known her husband since childhood. He had told her that Arthur had been under considerable strain. He had told her that accidents happened. He had told her that the wisest course for a young widow was not to search for explanations which could no longer alter the past. At the time, Eleanor had believed him. Now the letters lay open behind her. Lord Ashcombe had not believed him. Neither, apparently, had Arthur. Mrs. Bell stood in the doorway of the nursery. "You must decide what you wish to do." Julian looked toward Eleanor. "You don't have to see him." "Yes, I do." Mr. Reed frowned. "That may not be wise. Neither was my husband dying with everyone telling me not to ask why." She gathered the letters carefully and placed them back into the drawer. Julian watched her. "You cannot let him know what we have found." "I know." "Then why meet him?" "Because if he has come here himself, he already suspects something." Julian was silent. She turned toward him. "And if I refuse to see him, he will know that I am afraid." A faint expression of approval appeared in his eyes. "You have changed rather quickly." Eleanor looked at him. "I have had a difficult morning." That almost made him smile. Almost. Mr. Reed closed the leather case containing the notebook. "We should hide the papers." "Where?" Julian looked around the nursery. The obvious place would be the worst. Eleanor thought for a moment. Then she walked to the old cabinet and removed one of the nursery books. Inside the hollow space behind it was a narrow gap between the wooden backing and the wall. She placed the letters there. Julian raised an eyebrow. "How did you find that?" "My father used to hide his tobacco there when my mother was angry with him." Despite everything, Mr. Reed gave a small cough that might have been a laugh. Eleanor replaced the book. "Now," she said, "I will meet Mr. Bellamy." They descended together. The staircase seemed longer than before. The light in the entrance hall had changed while they were upstairs. Evening had begun to gather beyond the tall windows, and the lamps cast warm circles across the dark wood. Outside, the western sky was streaked with pale gold beneath a layer of violet cloud, while the bare branches of the elms moved slowly against the fading light. Horace Bellamy stood near the fireplace. He was a handsome man in his late 50s, with silver at his temples and a well-kept moustache. His coat was dark brown, his gloves cream, and a gold watch chain lay neatly across his waistcoat. He carried himself with the comfortable assurance of a gentleman who had spent his entire life being welcomed into other people's houses. He turned when Eleanor entered. For one brief instant, surprise crossed his face. Then it vanished. "Mrs. Vale." His voice was exactly as she remembered it. Warm, measured, almost affectionate. He opened his arms slightly, as though he might have embraced her. Eleanor did not move. He lowered them. "My dear girl, I was terribly sorry to hear of your difficulties." "My difficulties?" He glanced toward Thomas, who had come downstairs with Mrs. Bell. "Your circumstances." "My circumstances are no concern of yours." Bellamy smiled gently, still as proud as ever. Eleanor felt a coldness settle inside her. She had heard that phrase before. Arthur had once used it when she refused to borrow money from his uncle. She had thought it affectionate. Now she wondered whether everyone in her husband's family had mistaken her independence for something inconvenient. Bellamy turned toward Julian. "Mr. Ashcombe. Mr. Bellamy." The two men exchanged no handshake. That told Eleanor more than either of them said. "I had not expected to find you here," Bellamy remarked. Julian's expression remained neutral. "This is my home, of course." Bellamy's smile remained. "But it is an unusual time to be discussing estates. Then why have you come?" "To pay my respects." Julian's gaze did not change. "To Mrs. Vale, to all of you." Mrs. Bell entered carrying a tea tray. Bellamy stepped aside politely. "Agnes." "Mr. Bellamy, you have not changed." "I have." He looked at her. She continued arranging the cups. "I am older." A silence followed. Eleanor almost smiled. Bellamy chose not to answer. Instead, he turned back toward her. "I heard that you had been invited to remain here." "I have." "That is extraordinary." "Why?" He hesitated. "Because Ashcombe is not a suitable place for a young widow and child." Julian's expression hardened. "It is suitable enough for you." Bellamy looked at him. "I beg your pardon?" "You heard me." Bellamy gave a mild laugh. "I see that Lord Ashcombe's temper survived him." Julian said nothing. Eleanor watched Bellamy closely. His eyes moved around the room. The staircase, the corridor, the portrait of Edmund, the door leading toward the west wing. It was only a glance, but it was enough. He was searching, not admiring, searching. Eleanor remembered the words in Lord Ashcombe's letter. "Do not believe the first account given to you of Arthur Vale's death." She folded her hands in front of her. "Why are you really here?" Bellamy looked at her. "For you." "No." His smile disappeared. "You seem to have misunderstood me." "I don't think I have." "You are grieving." "I have been grieving for a year." "Then you know that grief can make people suspicious." "I also know that grief makes people observant." The room became very quiet. Bellamy looked at her for several seconds. Then he smiled again. "You have changed." "Yes." He turned toward Julian. "May I speak with Mrs. Vale privately?" "No," Julian said. The answer was immediate. Bellamy's eyes narrowed. "I am a member of her late husband's family, and she is a guest under my uncle's protection." "Your uncle is dead." Julian stepped closer. "His instructions are not." Bellamy's face hardened for the first time. It lasted only a moment. Then he reached into his coat. Eleanor instinctively moved backward. He removed a small envelope. "I came because I believe you should have this." He held it out. Eleanor did not take it. "What is it?" "A letter from Arthur." Her breath caught. Julian looked at her. "Don't." Bellamy's eyes remained on Eleanor. "You have been searching for answers. Surely you would like something written in your husband's own hand." Eleanor stared at the envelope. There was no reason to trust him, and yet the desire to open it was almost unbearable. Arthur, her husband's handwriting, perhaps an explanation, perhaps an apology, perhaps the answer to a question she had carried through every sleepless night since his death. She reached for it. Julian's hand closed gently around her wrist. Eleanor. She looked at him. His voice was low. Not here. She slowly withdrew her hand. Bellamy watched the exchange. Something unreadable passed across his face. Then he smiled. Of course. He placed the envelope upon the mantel. You may open it when you are ready. Eleanor did not answer. Bellamy took his gloves. I should leave you. He moved toward the door. At the threshold he paused. Mrs. Vale. She looked at him. Be careful what you find in this house. Then he left. The front door closed. The sound seemed to travel through the entire manor. For several seconds no one spoke. Thomas stood beside Mrs. Bell, staring at the closed door. Mama? Eleanor knelt. Yes. Is that the man from before? Her blood ran cold. What man? The sad man. Julian looked sharply at him. Thomas. The boy frowned. The man upstairs. Eleanor gently took his hand. There was no man upstairs. Thomas looked toward the staircase. Yes, there was. Julian crouched so that they were at the same height. What did he look like? Thomas thought. He was old, like Mr. Bellamy. Thomas shook his head. No, like Lord Ashcombe. The child became uncertain. I don't know. Eleanor felt a strange pressure in her chest. She looked at Mrs. Bell. The housekeeper was staring at Thomas with an expression Eleanor had never seen before. Not fear, recognition. Agnes? Mrs. Bell looked away. I think the boy is tired. She led Thomas toward the kitchen. Eleanor watched them go, then turned to Julian. You know something? He did not deny it. I know my uncle was ill near the end. That is not what I mean. Julian looked toward the portrait. My uncle sometimes spoke as though he expected someone to arrive after his death. Me? I don't know. Did he ever mention me? No. Eleanor's frustration rose. Then why does everyone behave as though I have been part of this house for years? Julian looked at her. Perhaps you have. She stared at him. What does that mean? I don't know. That is becoming your favorite answer. He looked almost apologetic. It is the truth. Eleanor turned away. The envelope lay upon the mantel. She picked it up. Her hands were trembling. Julian watched her. Do you want me to stay? No. Are you sure? Yes. He nodded. Then he moved toward the corridor. At the doorway he stopped. If the letter contains something dangerous, do not confront him alone. Mr. Bellamy? Yes. I thought you didn't trust him. I don't. Why? Julian looked back. Because my uncle didn't. Then he left. Eleanor stood alone in the room. The fire had burned low. Outside, darkness had settled over the grounds, and the windows reflected the room so clearly that for a moment she could almost imagine another woman standing opposite her. A woman who had been younger, more trusting, still married, still certain that the world could be understood if one simply asked the right person the right question. She opened the envelope. The paper inside was Arthur's. She recognized his handwriting immediately. For several seconds she could not read. Then she began. Eleanor, if you have received this letter, then I have failed to keep my promise. She stopped. Her fingers tightened. She read on. There are things I should have told you before now. I told myself that silence would protect you, but the truth is that I was afraid. Not for myself, for you. A tear fell onto the page. She wiped it away. My uncle Bellamy is involved in matters which I cannot explain safely in writing. Lord Ashcombe knows more than I do, but he has warned me that the papers I possess could destroy several men if they were made public. Eleanor's breath became shallow. She continued, "If anything happens to me, do not go to Bellamy. Do not accept his money. Do not sign anything he places before you. And above all, do not allow him to take Thomas." The letter slipped slightly in her hand. Thomas. Her child. Why would Arthur have written that? She read the final paragraph. "There is one person I trust, Edmund Ashcombe. I do not know why he has chosen to help us, and I do not know what he expects in return. But if I die, go to him. He promised me that he would protect you." Eleanor stared at the page. Lord Ashcombe. Arthur had known. He had trusted him, and Lord Ashcombe had kept the promise until his death. A soft sound came from behind her. She turned. Julian stood in the doorway. He had not left the house. His face was pale. "I heard enough." Eleanor folded the letter. "Then you know." "I know my uncle was involved. With my husband." "Yes." She looked at him. "And Bellamy." "Yes." "Why didn't you tell me?" "Because I did not know." She believed him. That was the frightening part. She sat down. Julian crossed the room. For once, he did not stand at a distance. He took the chair opposite hers. What else did Arthur write? Eleanor handed him the letter. He read it. His eyes stopped at one sentence. Then he looked up. "Eleanor." "What?" "This says, Lord Ashcombe promised to protect you." "Yes." Julian turned the paper over. There was something written on the back. A single line. Neither of them had noticed it before. Julian read it aloud. He said he would make the house remember you. Eleanor looked toward the dark windows. The phrase made no sense. And yet she remembered the nursery, the fire, the child's nightshirt, the wooden horse, the key, the locked room. All the small things that had seemed unrelated. Perhaps they were not. Perhaps the house was not waiting for her because Lord Ashcombe had simply instructed Agnes to admit her. Perhaps he had left something more deliberate behind. Something designed to lead her from one room to another, from one memory to another, from one truth to the next. A faint sound came from upstairs. This time it was not a knock. It was the sound of a door closing. Julian stood immediately. Eleanor rose. They looked at one another. Neither needed to speak. They went upstairs together. The corridor was empty. The door of the west nursery remained open. Inside, the fire that had been cold earlier was burning. No one had lit it. Eleanor stepped into the room. On the small wooden table lay something that had not been there before, a black leather ledger. Beside it was a folded sheet of paper. Julian picked up the paper. He opened it. The handwriting was Lord Ashcombe's. "The first truth is never the whole truth." Below it was another sentence. "Ask Julian what happened in the winter of 1878. Eleanor turned toward him. He had gone completely still. What happened in 1878? Julian looked at the portrait of his mother. For several seconds he said nothing. Then, very quietly, he answered, "That was the year my mother died." Eleanor waited. There was an accident. She remembered Lord Ashcombe's warning. The first account was never the whole truth. Julian looked at her. "My uncle told everyone she died of pneumonia." His voice lowered. "But I remember seeing blood on her dress." The fire cracked softly behind them. Eleanor looked at the portrait of Lady Margaret. For the first time, the woman's painted smile no longer appeared peaceful. It appeared frightened. And in the corner of the room, beneath the faded curtain, something small and white had been pushed halfway beneath the skirting board. Eleanor bent down. It was a child's ribbon, blue, faded with age. She lifted it carefully. On one end, embroidered in tiny thread, was a single name, Samuel. Julian stared at it. Neither of them spoke. Outside, the winter wind moved through the bare trees of Ashcombe Manor, and the old house gave a long, low creak, as though somewhere deep within its walls, a memory had finally begun to wake. The name Samuel remained between them. For a long while, neither Eleanor nor Julian touched the ribbon. It lay across Eleanor's palm, faded blue against the whiteness of her skin, so delicate that it seemed impossible that it had survived all those years inside a house where so many other things had disappeared. Julian finally reached for it. His fingers closed around the embroidered edge. My mother never spoke of a Samuel. Perhaps she could not. He looked at Eleanor. You think this was her child? I do not know. But the nursery, the dates, the letters. He looked toward the portrait. My mother died in 1878. The name Samuel appears in a letter from 7 years earlier. Eleanor nodded. Then perhaps we should stop asking what the house wants us to believe and ask what the evidence tells us. Julian looked at her for a moment. You are becoming very like my uncle. I hope not. That drew the smallest smile from him. It disappeared almost immediately. He turned toward the leather ledger. This may tell us. They opened it together. The first pages contained household accounts, lists of repairs, payments to servants, and notes concerning the estate. Then the entries changed. Names appeared, dates, places, and, scattered among them, references to a child. Samuel, physician called. Samuel, fever reduced. Samuel, moved to West Nursery. Margaret insists that no one outside the house is to know. Eleanor's hand rose to her mouth. Julian read the next entry. Edmund believes Bellamy has discovered the truth. The room became silent. Then came another. Arthur Vale has been told. Julian looked at Eleanor. Your husband knew. Yes. The next page had been torn away. Only a ragged edge remained. Julian turned several pages. More were missing. At last, they found a later entry. Samuel removed from Ashcombe. Beneath it, Margaret will not forgive me. Eleanor looked up. Your uncle? Julian nodded. He took the child away. Where? I don't know. The next entry answered part of the question. Samuel is safe. Bellamy must believe him dead. Eleanor stared at the words. Why would Bellamy care whether a child lived? Julian did not answer. Mr. Reed entered the room. He had been searching the lower library. When he saw the ledger, his expression changed. You found it. You knew it existed. Yes. Why did you not tell us? Because Lord Ashcombe instructed me not to. Eleanor stood. Enough. Mr. Reed stopped. I want every instruction he left. Not pieces, not carefully chosen sentences, everything. The solicitor looked at her for a long moment. Then he nodded. There is a safe in the library. Julian frowned. Why didn't you open it? Because I did not have the combination. Eleanor thought of the brass key. The key opened the desk. Yes. What opens the safe? Mr. Reed looked at her. Your name. She stared at him. What? Lord Ashcombe left the combination in the form of a date. What date? The date of your husband's first visit to Ashcombe. Eleanor knew it immediately. She told him. The 3 numbers were entered. The safe opened. Inside were letters. Dozens of them. Some were addressed to Arthur. Some to Edmund. Some to Lady Margaret. And one bore Eleanor's name. The letter was not sealed. She opened it. Eleanor, if you have reached this point, then I am certain you have already discovered enough to distrust the people who have spoken most confidently to you. She almost smiled. Lord Ashcombe had understood people well. There is a child named Samuel. He was born in this house. His mother was Margaret. His father was never publicly named. Eleanor's eyes moved downward. That omission was deliberate. She read more quickly. Samuel was not my son. He was the child of Margaret and a man whom Bellamy wished to destroy. The man's name was James Vale. Eleanor stopped. James Vale. Arthur's father. Her husband's father. The room seemed to shift. Arthur had been Samuel's brother. Or, she read again, Samuel was not her husband's brother. He was her husband's half-brother, and Bellamy had spent years trying to erase him. The next paragraph explained why. James Vale had possessed evidence of financial fraud involving Bellamy and several landowners. When James died unexpectedly, Bellamy believed the evidence had died with him. But it had not. It had been entrusted to Arthur, and later to Lord Ashcombe. Eleanor closed her eyes. Everything was beginning to connect. Arthur had not been careless. He had been afraid. Lord Ashcombe had not rescued her out of charity. He had been keeping a promise to Arthur. And Samuel had not disappeared because he was unwanted. He had disappeared because someone wanted him dead. The final paragraph was shorter. Samuel is alive. Eleanor looked up. Julian was staring at the page. Alive? Mr. Reed nodded slowly. Apparently, the letter continued. He lives under another name in the north of England. I have paid for his education and ensured that no record connects him to Ashcombe. He knows nothing of his birth. Eleanor felt tears gather in her eyes. Why? To protect him, Julian whispered. The final sentence was written more heavily than the others. When the time comes, tell him that his mother did not abandon him. Eleanor folded the letter. There was no triumph in the discovery, only sadness. So many lives had been bent by fear. So many people had believed that silence was protection. She looked at Julian. What happened to your mother? He stood beside the window. I think she tried to bring Samuel back. And my uncle stopped her. Why? To save him. Julian closed his eyes. He believed Bellamy would kill the boy. The room fell quiet. Then Eleanor noticed another paper inside the safe. It was a legal document. She unfolded it. At the bottom was Lord Ashcombe's signature. The final promise shall pass to Eleanor Vale. She looked at Julian. What does that mean? Before he could answer, a carriage arrived outside. Mr. Reed went to the window. His face changed. Bellamy. Julian looked toward the drive. He has returned. Eleanor folded the document. Then perhaps it is time he stopped believing we were frightened. Horace Bellamy did not knock this time. He entered Ashcombe Manor as though the house belonged to him. The front door opened. His boots crossed the marble floor. His expression was pleasant, almost cheerful. But there was something different in his eyes. He knew. Perhaps not everything, but enough. Julian met him in the hall. You were not invited. Bellamy removed his gloves. I have business here. You have no business here. Bellamy smiled. That remains to be seen. Eleanor descended the stairs. Bellamy looked at her. Mrs. Vale. She stopped halfway down. You returned. I did. Why? Because I believe you have something that belongs to me. Eleanor's heart beat once, hard. What? You know. No. Bellamy's smile disappeared. The papers. Julian moved between them. You should leave. Bellamy looked at him. You know nothing about the papers. I know enough. Do you? Bellamy's voice softened. Your uncle was a sentimental old man. He involved himself in matters beyond his understanding. Your mother died because of that. Julian went still. My mother died of pneumonia. Bellamy smiled. Did she? The words struck the room like a stone. Eleanor saw Julian's face change. Bellamy turned toward her. You see what happens when old stories are disturbed. People begin remembering things that never happened. Eleanor descended the remaining stairs. My husband remembered. Bellamy froze. You have Arthur's letter. It was not a question. Eleanor did not answer. Bellamy's eyes narrowed. Give it to me. No. You don't understand what you are holding. I understand that you want it. He stepped closer. You have a child. Eleanor felt fear then. Real fear. But she did not step backward. I know. And children require protection. Julian's voice became cold. Leave. Bellamy ignored him. Mrs. Vale, you have suffered enough. I am offering you the opportunity to walk away. From what? From all of this? No. Think carefully. I have. Bellamy's expression hardened. You have no money. I have a roof. You have no legal security. I have Lord Ashcombe's will. You have no family here. Eleanor looked at Julian. Then at Mrs. Bell. Then toward the staircase. I have enough. Bellamy stared at her. For the first time, he understood that the woman before him was no longer the widow he had visited after Arthur's funeral. She was someone else, someone who had learned that fear could be endured. He turned toward Julian. Your uncle destroyed this family. No, Julian said. You think he protected you. He protected my mother. Bellamy's face changed. Julian stepped forward. You lied about her death. Bellamy said nothing. You lied about Samuel. Still nothing. You lied about Arthur. Bellamy's jaw tightened. Julian continued. And you lied to me. A long silence followed. Then Bellamy laughed. It was a small, bitter sound. You have no proof. Mr. Reed entered the hall. I believe I can correct that. Bellamy turned. The solicitor held a leather folder. Inside were copies of the financial records. Names, accounts, payments, signatures, dates. Bellamy stared at them. You searched the safe. Yes. You had no authority. I had Lord Ashcombe's. Bellamy's face became pale. Mr. Reed continued. These documents establish that funds were diverted from several estates over a period of 11 years. They also establish that you had access to the accounts. Bellamy looked at Eleanor. You think this will save you? No, she said. I think the truth will. For several seconds, no one spoke. Then the sound of wheels came from outside. Another carriage. Bellamy turned toward the window. Mr. Reed smiled faintly. The magistrate. Bellamy's expression collapsed. He understood. Lord Ashcombe had prepared everything. Not only the documents, not only the witnesses, but the timing. He had known Bellamy would come. Perhaps he had known that Eleanor would be brave enough to stand against him. The front door opened. Two men entered. Bellamy did not resist. He simply stood in the hall, suddenly looking older than he had when he arrived. As he was escorted away, he looked once at Eleanor. You should never have come here. Eleanor met his gaze. I think I was meant to. The door closed behind him. Silence followed. Not the fearful silence of before. A different one. The silence that comes after a storm. Julian looked toward Eleanor. It is over. She shook her head. No, he frowned. There is still Samuel. 3 weeks later, the first signs of spring appeared. The snowdrops emerged beneath the stone walls. The bare branches of the orchard began to show tiny green buds. Ashcombe Manor was still old, still draughty, still far too large for a woman and a child. But it no longer felt empty. There were sounds again. Thomas laughing in the corridor. Mrs. Bell complaining about muddy boots. Mr. Reed arriving twice a week with papers. And Julian, who had begun spending more time at the estate than he had intended. He and Eleanor rarely spoke about the future, perhaps because both understood that some futures should be allowed to arrive without being forced. One afternoon a letter arrived. It came from the north. Eleanor recognized the handwriting of the young man who had been living under another name. Samuel. He had been told part of the truth. Not everything. Not yet. He was not ready. But he wished to visit Ashcombe. Eleanor held the letter for a long time. Julian stood beside the window. He wants to come home. Eleanor looked at him. Was it ever his home? Julian thought about it. Perhaps it will be. Outside, Thomas was running through the garden. He had grown fond of the old orchard. Eleanor watched him. He will need someone to explain. I will. Julian paused. Will you? Yes. She folded the letter. And when he asks why his mother left him, I will tell him the truth. Julian nodded. What truth? That she did not leave him. He looked toward the portrait of Lady Margaret. She loved him. Yes. And my uncle. Eleanor was silent. Then she smiled faintly. He kept his promise. Julian looked at her. What promise? She reached into the drawer and took out Lord Ashcombe's final letter. The last page contained only one sentence. She had read it many times. I promised Arthur that if I could not save his life, I would save the lives he loved. Eleanor folded the page. That one. Spring came slowly to Ashcombe. It arrived first in the smallest places. A green shoot beneath the kitchen window. A cluster of snowdrops near the chapel wall. The return of swallows beneath the eaves. Then one morning, Eleanor opened the western curtains and found the garden transformed. The old apple trees were flowering. Their branches, which had looked so bare and unforgiving through the winter, were suddenly covered with pale blossoms. The stone paths were still cracked. The fountain still needed repair. The walls still carried years of moss. Yet the garden no longer appeared abandoned. It appeared patient. Thomas stood beneath the trees. Mama! Eleanor went outside. He had found something. A small blue ribbon. He held it carefully. The same color as the ribbon they had found in the nursery. Eleanor crouched beside him. Where did you find that? Under the tree. She smiled. Perhaps the garden is returning things. Thomas considered this. Can gardens remember? Eleanor looked at the old manor. Yes, she believed it now. Not literally, but in another way. Places remembered through the people who loved them. Through objects left behind. Through doors that were opened after years of silence. Through stories that were finally told. Julian came through the garden gate. He carried a letter. Samuel has arrived in the village. Eleanor stood. When? This morning. Her heart tightened. Is he coming here? He is walking. She looked toward the road. For a moment, there was only sunlight and blossom. Then a young man appeared beyond the stone wall. He stopped when he saw the house. He looked uncertain, almost afraid. Julian went to meet him. They stood several yards apart. Neither spoke at first. Then Julian held out his hand. Samuel looked at it. After a moment, he took it. Eleanor watched from the garden. There was something deeply moving in the sight of them together. Two men connected by a woman they had both lost. Two lives separated by fear. Two brothers who had never been allowed to know they were brothers. Samuel finally looked toward Eleanor. She smiled. He came closer. Mrs. Vale? Yes. My name is Samuel. I know. He looked at the house. Did my mother live here? Yes. Did she love me? Eleanor felt tears gather in her eyes, but she did not look away. She loved you enough to let you disappear so that you could live. Samuel lowered his head. For a moment, he seemed unable to speak. Then Eleanor handed him the faded blue ribbon. This belonged to her. He took it carefully. His fingers trembled. She kept this. Yes. He closed his hand around it. And for the first time, the young man who had spent his entire life without a name that belonged entirely to him stood beneath the flowering trees of Ashcombe Manor and knew that he had not been forgotten. That evening, the garden was quiet. Thomas had fallen asleep beside the fire. Samuel had gone to the guest room. Mr. Reed had returned to town. Mrs. Bell had retired upstairs. Only Eleanor and Julian remained in the drawing room. The windows stood open. The evening air carried the scent of apple blossom into the room. Julian poured 2 glasses of wine. "You saved this house," he said. Eleanor shook her head. "No, you did." "No, Lord Ashcombe did." Julian looked at her. "He only left the instructions. He trusted you to follow them." "I did not. You followed them better than anyone could have." She looked out toward the garden. "I was afraid. I know. I am still afraid. I know." She smiled. "That is not very reassuring." He smiled too. "No." Silence settled between them. A comfortable silence now. Not the silence of secrets. The silence of 2 people who no longer needed to fill every moment with explanations. After a while, Julian said, "My uncle left another document." Eleanor looked at him. "What document?" "A codicil." "What does it say?" "He left Ashcombe Manor to you." She stared at him. "What?" "And to Thomas." "No, he did. I cannot accept it. You already have." She looked at him. "I have done nothing. You stayed. That is not enough. For this house, it was." She looked toward the garden. The flowering trees moved softly in the evening wind. "Why did he choose me?" Julian answered quietly. "Because Arthur trusted him." "And why did Arthur trust him?" "Because Edmund kept his word." Eleanor looked at him. "And you?" Julian was silent. She waited. At last he said, "I am trying to." She smiled. There was no declaration, no dramatic promise, no grand gesture. Only his hand resting quietly beside hers upon the table. After a moment, Eleanor placed her fingers over it. Outside, the last light of day settled across the garden. The old stone walls turned golden. The apple blossoms became almost white. And Ashcombe Manor, which had spent so many years holding its secrets in darkness, seemed at last to have nothing left to hide. The final promise of Lord Ashcombe had never been about land. It had never been about money. It had never even been about the estate. It had been about remembering the people whom fear had forced others to forget. Arthur had asked Edmund to protect Eleanor. Edmund had protected her. Margaret had loved Samuel. Edmund had saved him. And Eleanor, who had arrived at Ashcombe as a frightened widow with a child in her arms, had become the keeper of every truth that the dead had been unable to carry with them. Years later, when people spoke of Ashcombe Manor, they would remember the old house, the western garden, the locked nursery, and the strange story of the documents hidden beneath the stone wall. But Eleanor remembered something simpler. She remembered the morning after the first spring rain, when she opened the nursery window and heard Thomas laughing somewhere below. She remembered the apple trees in bloom. She remembered Samuel standing beneath them, with his mother's ribbon in his hand. And she remembered the moment she finally understood what Lord Ashcombe had meant when he wrote that a house could remember. A house remembered through those who returned, through those who forgave, through those who remained. And, sometimes, through a promise made by a dying man to a frightened young father many years before, a promise carried quietly across death, winter, grief, and silence, until it finally reached the person for whom it had always been intended. Eleanor closed the window. The evening settled gently over Ashcombe, and for the first time in many years, the house slept without waiting for anyone to come home.